Time to turn our attention now to the international newspapers. Elena with us here in the studio. The main news we've been telling you this morning is about Gaddafi's family fleeing to Algeria. How's that gone down in the international papers?
Well, let's take a look at the Algerian paper El Watan, which has assembled a panel of intelligence experts, including former Algerian generals, to talk about relations between the two countries and what exactly has brought the Algerian government to welcome Gaddafi's family, or at least, allow them to go there. They say that for the Algerian government, they're above all worried about the National Transitional Council representing a threat to its own survival because it might inspire Algerian people to follow suit and start a revolution. But the experts interviewed say that actually the government has shot itself in the foot by allowing the Gaddafi family to come into Algeria, because they say the country could have been a key player in North Africa. They could have used their good relations that they had with those people working in the National Transitional Council who did previously serve under Gaddafi in order to build a strong relationship with Libya after Gaddafi. And it says now the new Libya will probably become the US's favoured interlocutor in the region, which means Algeria will be pushed out of the diplomatic row it has already. And now by allowing Gaddafi's family in, they've diplomatically isolated themselves and, of course, made themselves look like a more repressive autocratic regime than they did before. 20 years ago, the paper says, they were the most democratic country in North Africa. Now it looks like Algeria has taken a massive backward step and has positioned itself on the wrong side of history.
We're still staying with the Libyan story. A lot of calls, of course, for the Lockerbie bomber to be extradited. But the Independent in the UK, they're calling for him to be allowed to die in peace in Libya.
Yes, this is the Independent there. It's on the bottom of this front page. Now, it's quite interesting because most of the English-speaking press is furious still about the fact that al-Megrahi is still alive 2 years after he supposedly had 3 months to live and was released from jail in Scotland. But the Independent says it's important for the new Libya that he be allowed to die there in peace. It says the National Transitional Council needs to establish a government that looks independent rather than being serving foreign governments, especially the US. And they also say that al-Megrahi's conviction, his original conviction, is unsafe. They go back over the prosecution evidence and say he was a scapegoat. It was convenient for the Gaddafi regime to find someone at the moment that he was handed over because Gaddafi at the time desperately needed sanctions to be lifted. And they say the prosecution's evidence just didn't really add up. You might remember there was a shopkeeper in Malta who identified him as buying the clothes that were found in the same suitcase as the bomb. Now, apparently, it turns out that shopkeeper received $2 million from the US government for providing that evidence that helped lead to the conviction. And Swiss manufacturer of bomb timers tells the Independent he was offered millions by the US government to say that Megrahi bought one of his bomb timers when that wasn't true, and he turned that money down. So it looks like the whole case against Megrahi, according to the Independent, was very shaky to start with.
Okay, moving on to other things. Newsweek is out today. You pull out an article by the Chinese dissident Al Ai Weiwei.
Yes, he of course became hugely famous. So all around the world, his case became really a huge cause célèbre this year, and when he did time in detention. And he was recently released and is now on bail, but he's written this very strongly worded piece that's caused an online sensation about the city of Beijing, calling it a prison where people go mad. It says Beijing is two cities, one of power and money where people don't trust their neighbours, and another of desperation, of poor migrant workers brought there to work on public works projects who end up living in illegal structures. They can't get hospital treatment or education because they can't afford to bribe doctors and teachers. And he says the worst thing is the lack of control citizens have over their own lives, saying it's like living in a sandstorm where everything is constantly changing according to someone else's will. He calls it a Kafkaesque nightmare. So it might be interesting to see what happens to Weiwei once Chinese authorities have to read this article.
Exactly. OK, now you're going to go on to something which a bit of a spreading story, really. Rich calling on governments to tax them more. It's happened in France, it's happened elsewhere. Now it's spreading to Germany.
Yeah, now there's an appeal launched in Die Welt by a group of German millionaires who say they'd like to make more of a contribution to the country's public finances. They aren't really the biggest corporate fish. They're people who have millions of inherited wealth, but the leader's a retired doctor who happens to have $2 million in assets. But he suggests a 5% asset tax for 2 years to everyone with more than €500,000 in capital. So he's got another 50 millionaires to sign that petition. So we'll have to wait and see if the German government follows up on his offer.
And there they are with their champagne. All right, Elena, thank you very much. That's Elena here with the international newspapers then here on France 24.